Hi, I'm Jonathan Fields, and this is Good Life Project. Really psyched to be hanging out with my friend Chip Conley today. Chip built a pretty stunning boutique hotel chain and has been deeply involved just in the world and the concept of hospitality and culture building. And he's got a couple of new quests that he's on right now. I want to really dive into it. He's also a New York Times best-selling author, really phenomenal thinker about how to bring people together and bring value to people in organizations. So awesome hanging out with you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a lot to live up to.
It's just the truth.
Well,
you've already lived up to it.
You said quest, and I see life as just one fortune cookie after the next. It's about curiosity, and I'm curious about life, and that seems to lead me in a variety of different directions.
All right, so because this is a fascinating starting place, right? Talk to me more about this. And the reason I bring it up is because I was never sort of clued in to this notion of curiosity as a huge driver. I just didn't think about it. And we were shooting an early episode, and when we wrapped shooting, the guest on that episode, one of the guys who was running second or third camera, he had ink all over his body. It's like a lot of tattoos. And the guest went up to him, and he's like, "Tell me about this." And he started telling him, and then he followed up his arm. He's like, well, "Lift your," and he wants to know. He's like, "Well, where does it go?" And like, "What's the story?" And the guest was very high profile. He was going from Us to, like 2 other network TV shows and then 9 countries. And what struck me so much, and he's incredibly successful, was that his level of genuine, non-shticky, real curiosity.
Sure.
So he looked at this guy, and he looked at what was on his arm, and he really wanted to know the story.
Yeah. Curiosity is fascinating. It's the opposite of depression. Depression is a closing down. Curiosity is an opening up. And I went on a quest about 4 or 5 years ago, learning about happiness. I went to Bhutan, the gross national happiness country. And what I learned about curiosity is that it's, of all of the emotional states you can be in, it's the one most directly correlated to happiness. And it's partly because when you're curious by nature, you keep your options open and you look for new things. What happens when you're depressed, anxious, etc., is you tend to close down and you get focused. It's that fight or flight thing of like, okay, gotta focus. And curiosity is the opposite of that. And when you take that curious spirit to everything, it allows you to imagine more. And if you're a creative person by nature, curiosity is sort of the fuel that allows the creativity to happen. So that's for me. The people I know, Peter Drucker was a very famous management theorist who, until he died in his mid-90s, every year or two he would come up with a new subject that had nothing to do with management theory, in which he would devour it and make him the world's leading expert in it. And he'd be curious, and I think it's part of the reason he lived and was writing books in his 90s, because he had a curious mind and spirit.
I mean, it's funny when you talk about him. The other person who pops into my mind really quickly, who I certainly never knew personally, is Richard Feynman, who's this legendary physics professor. But he was also a tremendous painter and sketch artist, and fascinated with and a writer. And it was he would become world class. He was a world class physicist, Nobel-winning physicist. And at the same time, he was almost like a serial virtuoso, and he wouldn't leave the old thing behind. But he would sort of like shift his curiosity and build into this new thing. And I think, I want to explore this whole thing about curiosity and depression more though, because it's an interesting comment to make.
Well, Einstein said, "I'm not all that smart, I'm just very, very, very curious." And Walt Disney, another completely different kind of thinker, said that the number one thing that led him to being an animated thinker was being curious. So I guess at the end of the day, for me, it has helped me at age 26 when I started my company to get curious about how to rethink the hotel business. And more recently, it's gotten me involved in these 2 questions that you've mentioned that we'll come back to, I guess.
So let's kind of zoom the lens back then, because you brought up this company that you started. 26 years old, you say?
I was 26 when I started Joie de Vivre. I gave it a very curious name.
Right.
Not the most practical name, Joie de Vivre.
Right, because people are like, how do you spell that?
How do you spell it? How do you pronounce it? What the hell does it mean?
Right, what's the URL for that?
Yeah. Well, back then there was no, this is 1986, 1987. There were no such thing as a URL. So Joie de Vivre means joy of life. And I loved the fact that there are very few companies in the world whose mission statement is also the name of the company. So we were in the business of creating joy of life for our employees first and our customers second. And I bought a motel in the Tenderloin of San Francisco, which is a tough neighborhood. Yeah. And it was famous, it was sort of infamous. It was very popular at lunchtime, and it did not have a restaurant. So it was, if you understand what I'm talking about, the guy I bought it from, who was an old band leader, said, you know, our occupancy annually is 142%. And I was dumb enough or naive enough to say, I don't understand. How can you do 142% occupancy? 100% would be the max. He says, well, when you rent by the hour, you actually get a higher occupancy rate. So I was curious then at age 26 why great hotels had to be chain hotels, and the boutique hotels that had just started to being launched then. Ian Schrager here in New York launched Morgan's Hotels.
Right.
But the boutique hotels that were coming out were all high end. And I said, why can't you have a low price or mid-priced boutique hotel that's cool, well designed, and affordable to a larger collection of people? And that's what I started doing. And 52 boutique hotels later, I took the company for 24 years as the CEO. Grew up mostly on the West Coast. I really believed that if you're going to have very unique hotels, each one different, best to keep your geographic focus in a particular location. So it was mostly California, mostly Bay Area. But I loved it, and every single one of them was like a piece of art, an original piece of art. And so that's how I got started. And I was curious about how do you treat employees, speaking of happiness, how do you treat employees from a place where instead of thinking of them as people who have 8-hour shifts, how do you actually, it's not mind share we were looking for or hours, it was like heart share. How do we get a piece of their heart such that they believe in us enough and they bring their heart to work? And that's what ultimately led me to writing a bunch of books, and the company grew, and we were the second best place to work in the Bay Area in 2008, and the 2010 the number one customer satisfaction ratings of any upscale hotel company in the United States. So you opened up the question. Yeah. How do you sort of speak to people on that level? Well, I'm a huge believer in Abe Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that iconic pyramid with physiological needs at the base and self-actualization, or being all you can be at the top. If you applied Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the employee experience, I think I would just put it in 3 levels. It would be money, recognition, and meaning. So money, recognition, and meaning. Most companies think the number one way to differentiate themselves, so most leaders think the way you differentiate yourself with your employees is compensation, the compensation package. And the truth is, yes, it can be a differentiator, but at the end of the day, it's not the number one reason people leave their job. People leave their job because of their boss, not liking their boss. So that recognition level is where you create the loyalty. But what I found with housekeepers from Vietnam, I talked about that, and I was lucky enough to speak at the TED conference, and I talked about Vivian, who I've worked with now for 27 years. She's a housekeeper from Vietnam. And what I learned quickly about Vivian, she started working in the motel I bought about a month before I bought it, is I realized quickly that to get her heart share, to really connect with her, money and recognition were not going to do it. It was about how to create meaning. So how do you create meaning for people who are cleaning toilets for a living? And at the end of the day, it has nothing to do with the tasks. It's not actually trying to teach them that being the best toilet cleaner in the world is going to actually create meaning. It's really tapping into what is it that makes them smile and makes them feel really good about their work. And so for housekeepers, it was building a community of housekeepers, because 90% of the housekeepers we have are immigrants. And so in many cases, their families are back in their home country. So doing a weekly potluck where these housekeepers from the Philippines and Vietnam, from Ethiopia and Guatemala. They'd bring in their food from their country, and the eight of these women would sit and have a potluck with their favorite foods from their country. That's the kind of thing that brought meaning. Or bringing a customer, a hotel guest, who had an amazing experience at the hotel, having that customer come to the monthly staff meeting and tell their story and talk about why they love coming to the hotel, and maybe a couple examples of things that some of the staff had done for them. Yeah. That's what creates meaning. So creating meaning is really, to me, the most important thing that leaders do, is how do you create meaning at work in the purpose of the company, and how do you create meaning in work, in the work that a person does, and so that they can understand the impact they're having.
It's so interesting. Adam Grant, who's a professor
at
Wharton, right?
I was in his most recent book,
Yeah, so the research that he shared about call centers for universities, how, and notoriously call centers across the board, like they have crazy high turnover. People are just banging out calls, reading scripts, and terrible close rates and all this other stuff. And he said they took the call center, and these were people who were making phone calls to try and raise money for scholarships for kids to go to university. And he found that when they would actually bring in one of the kids who had received a scholarship, that these people at the call center were responsible for generating the money for it, and share how that has changed his life, or her life. Maybe this is the first kid in their family of an immigrant family who's actually gone to college, and then they got a job and they were able to support the family, and they were doing something which is, they were so proud of, and that made a profound difference.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a similar thing to what you're talking about. The one thing to bring that person in to show them we've had an amazing experience here. But it's interesting too that the other thing you brought up was this sense of creating, if you know that a lot of the people that work in the hotels are people whose families are not here, creating sort of a surrogate family almost for them.
People sometimes ask, what's your favorite business book you've ever read? And I say Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is not a business book.
But it is.
But it is, in the sense that it's a humanity book. It's a book about psychology. He was a psychologist who believed that meaning was the fuel of life, and then he ended up in a concentration camp, and he got to see his theory in practice and see who died and who lived. And it usually wasn't the people who necessarily were, the people who died often were the people who gave up hope and lost a sense of meaning. So what I've learned from that book and from just studying companies and running a company with 3,500 employees from just one employee is that if you can create meaning in the purpose of the company, and then link that to what people do, so they understand that what they're doing is actually affecting that noble purpose. That is quite simply the best thing a leader can do. So.
No, it's really powerful. We had a recent conversation with Simon Sinek, who also said, one of his big awakenings was that he only wanted to serve those who served others. And I guess if you can sort of take that ideology and bring it to the culture that you're building, that we're here to serve, but fundamentally, even more than that, at the top, like the leader, like my job, I'm here to serve you and allow you to serve others.
There's a whole theory of servant leadership. I've never liked that language because servant leadership, it's the word
too submissive.
There's the servant. It does suggest somehow that you're just all you're doing is serving, and I think it is a collaborative effort. But I love it in the sense that it does say that in fact the people who are at the most senior levels of the company, noblesse oblige. There's an obligation of nobility. There's an obligation of how do you give back, and especially in a service industry, and the hotel industry and restaurants and spas, which are what I did for all those years, was all about that.
So you also, so you built this tremendous group of hotels, and then you created some pretty strong ideas, and you turned them into a book, and huge book, and now you have actually a couple books. There's Peak, Emotional Equations. What are the other two?
The Rebel Rules, and Marketing That Matters.
Right. So, which leads to an opportunity for you to actually get on stage and travel the world speaking a whole lot too. But at some point, you have a pretty major experience on stage.
Yeah, if you're talking about the 5 years ago. So I was moving way too quickly in my life. I've gone through, as the CEO of my company, Joie de Vivre, I went through 2 once-in-a-lifetime downturns. One of them was the dot-com bust. And in that one, I was the gladiator, and the company, all I wanted to do was learn. And I wanted to see, how do we get through this downturn? And we did really well. And then we went through the Great Recession not long after that, the one that the whole country went through, as opposed to just the Bay Area. And in the Great Recession, I was like, a prisoner in a prison. And that's why I started reading Viktor Frankl again, because it reminded me, what is it like to be in your own prison or in your own concentration camp? And long story short is, I was on stage with a broken ankle, a bacterial infection in my left leg, and at the end of a speech, I was feeling quite nauseous, sat down to sign books, and I went unconscious. And 5 minutes later, thankfully, 1 minute after the paramedics showed up, I died. I actually went flatline at age 47 on stage. And over the next 90 minutes, going to the hospital, being in the ICU, in the emergency room ICU, I kept dying. I died like 9 times, I guess. What they call asystolic, which means basically no heart rate. In the end, they didn't ever figure out what went wrong with me, other than maybe having an allergic reaction to the antibiotics I was on for my broken ankle and the cut on my leg that created a septic leg. But I saw it as a divine intervention. It was the moment in my life that said to me, wow, this isn't working. This isn't working. Right. Divine intervention. And within less than 2 years, I didn't want to be CEO of the company I started. Sometimes, one of the things that you can be the prisoner of success. You can be the prisoner of failure. You can be the prisoner of success. I was the prisoner of success. I had built a company. Richard Branson wrote the foreword to my first book, The Rebel Rules. And at a later stage in my life, I was in a very tiny way the Richard Branson of my company, just like he was for Virgin. And I was the icon, I was the identity in the San Francisco Bay Area. We were by far the largest hotelier. And I didn't want to be doing it anymore. I'm more of an entrepreneur than a CEO, but I'd never taken a step back and said, wow, I don't love this anymore. One day, one of my best friends asked me, so what was it that you loved about being the CEO or the head of Joie de Vivre, the founder, back in the early days? And I said, I just love the creativity and freedom. And she said to me, how much creativity and freedom do you have these days? And I said, none. And she said, well, I think it's time for you to figure out how to depart. But it was, how do you depart a company where you're the face of it? And how, with your own sense of identity.
Right, for 24 years.
24 years.
Right.
But it was so easy. I mean, after having a flatline experience. Ultimately, I sold a majority interest in the company to a guy named John Pritzker, who is a billionaire whose father started Hyatt. I still own a piece of that company. I didn't sell any of the hotels I own. I own hotels, the individual hotels. This is just the management company that I sold. And I stepped away, and that was 3 years ago. And it allowed me to go out and write my most recent book, Emotional Equations, and to go speak about it last year, and then to just sort of say, well, I'm curious about where life is going to take me next. What's my next calling? Yeah. I think that in life we can have one of 3 relationships with our work. It's either a job, I think of it in a pyramid again, a job, a career, or a calling. And for me, given how many hours a week we tend to work in this culture, in the US American culture of, I don't want to have a job. I don't even want to have a career. I want to have a calling. A calling is sort of something that you do not because you get paid well, not because of the money, not because of the recognition. You do it because of the intrinsic motivation, or just you lose track of time. Frankly, when a person's living their calling, they're losing track of time because they love it so much. So I sold the business. I started writing. I was writing and giving speeches, and I was enjoying that. That felt like a calling. And I didn't really know that there was another calling coming, or maybe even a couple.
Right.
That's the bizarre thing. I do manifest in my work life such an interesting collection of things. So I started just creating space in my life, which is something that I didn't have a lot of. And as I created space, new and interesting things started to come to me. And I was giving a speech here in New York in February of 2012, And at the end of my speech, the speech was about emotional equations, my last book, which is about emotional intelligence. And there were 600 people at the audience. And I said, at the end of the speech, I did Q&A. And there was a woman in the back, and she says, I love your speech, but I don't even want to ask a question about it. She says, I just know that your favorite place in the world is Bali. I've read up on you, and your favorite place in the world is Bali, and you've been there 11 times. And you're on the board of Burning Man, the Burning Man Project, the arts festival. And she said, why? She says, I love Bali and Burning Man too. Why do we both love Bali and Burning Man? And it was an odd question. It was a curious question. And I was in front of 600 people in New York thinking, okay, how do I answer this? And so I just started riffing. And what came out of my mouth in the next 5 minutes was I said, my favorite thing in the world is going to festivals. Bali is one endless festival. If you've ever been there, it's just a village festival after a village festival. And then it ends with a cremation ceremony at the end of your life, and the ultimate festival. And Burning Man is a festival that creates this collective effervescence, this collective joy, this interesting experience where people's boundaries and their egos almost melt in this communal, joyful experience, this collective effervescence. So on stage, out of the blue, I just said, I'd never thought this before or said it. I said, I think I want to become the world's leading expert on festivals, because I think festivals are going to help us to create more cultural curiosity. And as we go from 7 billion to 10 billion people in the next 40 years, we need more. We're not going to have more elbow room, so we need to learn how to get along with people a little bit better.
Yeah.
And so that's when I decided to start my quest of becoming the world's leading expert in festivals and creating a website, fest300.com, that really features the 300 best festivals in the world and lots of editorial on how to experience a great festival. And I have a blog where I write about the festivals I go to.
So basically your life now is going to festivals.
Well, my life is a lot of things, but one of the pieces, I've been to 30 festivals this year in 22 countries, 9 months, 8.5 months into the year. And I go to, there are religious festivals. Kumbh Mela is the largest festival in the world.
It's like millions, isn't it?
100 million people on the Ganges River. Every 12 years is the Maha Kumbh Mela, the largest one. And every 3 years is a smaller one with 70 million people.
Wow.
That was in February. Loved that. Oh gosh, I mean, I've been to so many. I love that. I went to the Baby Jumping Festival, which is a tiny little festival in Spain, but you may have seen it on video. And these guys dressed up like the devil jump over mattresses full of 6 or 8 babies under 1 year old, and they go over mattress over mattress over mattress throughout a whole village. It's,
oh my God.
It's a bizarre festival, and it has Catholic roots. Now it's sort of become Catholic pagan. It's a 400-year-old festival in northern Spain. I ran with the Bulls in July this year. That's not one that I loved because it's really a festival that has a great history that has become sort of a big frat party. I was in a fraternity, so nothing against frats, but the bottom line is it's more of it's lost the soul. It's more the people.
It's more like an ego, like I ran with the Bulls.
Yeah. And it's just drinking 24 hours a day. Yeah. So I just love festivals. I'm fascinated by them, of all kinds of music festivals, cultural festivals, religious festivals.
Talk to me more about this concept of, I think you said, collective effervescence.
Yeah, Emile Durkheim was a French sociologist, and he was the first one to actually coin that term. And he coined it actually studying religious festivals more than 100 years ago. His book that mentioned collective effervescence came out in 1912. And what he was able to see is that when people come together and they lose their sense of inhibition, but also they gain that sense of some kind of common intention, the thing that happens is people feel this sense of contagious joy. And the truth is that they've proven that emotions are contagious.
Right.
If I smile at you, you tend to smile back. It's part of the reason why we go to movie theaters to watch a movie as opposed to just on the DVD. We like the contagious emotion. It's part of the reason if you walk into a corporate meeting room where someone was just fired, even if the people have left the room, you can feel it. So there's something contagious about our emotions. In the context of a festival where there's common intention around why we're there, that gets magnified. So collective effervescence. And what's interesting to me around why festivals are important today is that the more digital we get, the more ritual we need, the more virtual we have in our relationships, where it's all on Facebook, it's all by cell phone. The more we have a life that's built less based upon in real life with together, and it's more based upon URLs of how we actually connect with each other online, the more we need this balance of the face-to-face and the opportunity to have collective effervescence. I think that's why Burning Man, with each passing year, gets more and more of an enthusiastic collection of followers. So that's my job, my job partly, I'm the founder, I have 6 full-time employees. We have no revenue or monetization model on it yet, which is fine. I'm lucky enough to be in a place in my life where I can have that hobby, an expensive hobby like that. But the real intention of it is to help people understand that they can make a commitment, that instead of going to a vacation, isn't that a terrible word? 2 words I hate occupation, which is what we say about our work. It's something that occupies us, and I hate vacation. The fact we vacate ourselves when we go and take a holiday. See, to me, that's not the way to live a life. I don't want something. The thing that occupies you is like a foreign country that has taken over a hostile takeover, or here in New York, Occupy Wall Street. It's usually not a positive sense, and to vacate something usually isn't so good either. So I think the idea of using your precious holiday time as a means of culturally connecting with something out there, that collective effervescence in a whole different environment, can be incredibly inspiring and enlightening. And so I've been lucky enough to have that be my passion and to some degree my profession in the last year.
Yeah, and I mean it's kind of interesting also how it integrates with what you built with the hotel as a hotelier for 24 years, because it's really, it's really, when you look at it, a pretty logical extension of not necessarily like the day-to-day business but actually sort of like the philosophy that you brought.
Joie de vivre, for one.
Right, then from the name.
Joy of life.
Then also this whole idea of, can I take this person who's cleaning toilets and elevate the experience to meaning?
Yes.
Festivals are sort of like this, it's like the quest for meaning.
Yeah, there's a crucible for meaning in festivals for sure. And there's a sense of the quest. And that's the part, anything that's got a pilgrimage component to it, and there's some pilgrimages at 15,000 feet in the Andes. There's just before the annual Inti Raymi festival in Peru, there's something called the Corto Riti festival. That I want to do that one because the idea of a pilgrimage is even better, where people come there. That's sort of what Burning Man is with people with their RVs and their tents. It's a pilgrimage to Mecca. A lot of this speaks to the idea of how do we create environments where habitats where people can be at that self-actualization place. Although I really believe that in a festival, it's almost like a social actualization place. It's not just about my own.
Like collective.
Yeah, it's not about my own actualizing myself. There's a social actualization to it.
Is that more powerful?
Yeah, I think it's not even just more powerful. Maslow, I was lucky. So Abraham Maslow, late in his life, the last 10 years of his life, kept a diary, a journal, and his family gave me one of the copies of it, of his journal. So I got to read Abe Maslow, this famous psychologist, last 10 years of his life. And late in his life, he took his 5-level pyramid, where it was self-actualization at the top, and he turned it into a 7-level one and an 8-level one. And the top level was self-transcendence, and the way he communicated what self-transcendence was is almost like it was social actualization. It's the ability to get completely out of yourself and to be there for something bigger than yourself that is going to have a legacy impact on the world. And so I think that's part of what appeals to me in terms of helping people to see festivals for the value of what they can offer.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just, it's powerful too, because I don't think people look at festivals that way. I think, well, I guess you've got faith-based festivals where it's like, this is what we do because it's part of our belief system. Every year we come together, and this is how I show devotion to, to the path, to
Devotion's
God,
a great word for it.
Whatever it may be. But then you have other festivals like Burning Man.
Well, I will argue that Burning Man is that. Burning Man is devotion. I mean, if you look at not for everybody. Yes, some people go there for the nudity, the drugs, the sex, the whole thing, and that's fine and whatever. And I've done that as well. But if you look at how much energy goes into the thousands of sculptures and pieces of art that are actually being created, it's the person hours, man hours going into it. Doesn't make any sense, and there's a devotion to it, and it really is a utopian community. It's a gift economy. It's a different kind of way of living, and as Brian Chesky, who I'm going to talk about in a moment, the founder of Airbnb, said when he was there for his first time for less than 24 hours this year, he said, "Wow. Burning Man is what the world would be if the artists were in charge." And there's something true about that. So there are lots of electronic dance music festivals, EDM festivals, which is the fastest growing form of festivals in the world today.
Exploding. It's
and
incredible.
those, many of those are they're just raucous, wild fun, and that's fine too. I mean, in essence, in the raucous, wild fun and the contagious nature of the crucible of that emotional state, that's another way to actually get out of your own head and out of your own sort of self-obsession.
But I also think it serves a huge need for huge need for belonging.
It does.
So I think a lot of people, you go hang out at the big EDM festivals, and a lot of those people will walk around sort of if they're not in their community and they're in the rest of sort of the mainstream, they feel like they don't fit, and that's a place where you can go and you're like, you know what?
Belong anywhere. Can I give it? This is a perfect segue.
Yeah.
Can I go there?
Go there.
So it's so funny you say that, and I just mentioned Brian. So here we are in New York, and just this week, I was announced that I'm the head of global hospitality for Airbnb. Now, the reason I bring up the belong anywhere piece of it is that, on some level, is the core of what that company's about. And I'll explain what Airbnb is in a minute, because some people may not know what Airbnb does. But it's an organization, a company that's 5 years old, that now has 500,000 listings around the world in 192 countries in 35,000 cities. By the end of next year, we'll be the largest hospitality company in the world. It'll surpass Hilton and in terms of the number of units it has around the world. And it's all based upon a really simple concept that is very age-old, and that is that people open up their home or their, either a room in their home or their apartment overall, or they may have a castle. Last weekend we had 123 people staying in castles in 42 countries. But generally speaking, it's people staying in someone's apartment or home. And they can belong anywhere. And that's sort of the real mantra of what it's all about. So it's part of the shared economy as well. The idea that we have to rethink how we spend money and resources in the world, whether it's on the side of cabs and the Lyft and Ubers of the world that are sort of taking on the taxis of the world, or Airbnb, which is in some ways taking on the established hotel industry. Airbnb wasn't started in order to be a competitor to Hilton.
Right. Well, it was started essentially just because they were
three founders in their 20s. There was a design convention in town. Two of the three guys had gone to Rhode Island School of Design. Yeah. There were no rooms in town. People were trying to find a place, and so they just put some air mattresses on their floor of their apartment, and people could stay there, and they charged for it. And ultimately, they saw that there's a huge market. And going into the recession, this was 2008. Going into the recession, there were a lot of people who were trying to figure out how to make ends meet, and they had an extra room in their home. Right. Empty nesters, young tech people also, and so all of a sudden they created a platform for people to put their treehouse or their castle or their couch online, And what's happened over time is Airbnb has gotten more upscale than Couchsurfing. They sort of started alike, and Airbnb now is much larger, much more upscale, much more established, and pretty much owns the space of shared housing opportunities. What I was at a place in my life, again, curiosity took hold of me. Brian Chesky is the CEO and co-founder, and he asked me to come to their offices and give a speech, their headquarters in San Francisco, and give a speech on hospitality innovation. And since boutique hotels were the disruptive innovator 30 years ago, I said, sure, I'll come. You're the disruptive innovator now. I had no interest or plans to go work there. I'd never actually stayed in an Airbnb listing before. But what was clear to me as I hung out with guys and women 25 years my junior, but twice as smart as me, and really thoughtful about how to use technology as an enabler, what became more and more clear to me is that this is the future of how hospitality is going to be done. I mean, the hotel industry is not going to go away anytime soon, but it also fit with festivals for a moment here. When you go to Austin for South by Southwest, oh my God, before Airbnb existed, you sometimes had to drive 50 miles away.
I know.
So what happened this last year at South by Southwest is the total number of people staying in Airbnb establishments at South by Southwest in Austin was more than all of the hotels combined in Austin. And that's partly because what it allows a city to do is say, yes, we can have a conference, convention, festival that can have the ability to be elastic in terms of the room supply.
Right.
So you don't have to build a bunch of convention hotels that are going to sit empty much of the year. And that's not the best way of us using resources in the 21st century. So it's an interesting competitive dynamic. It's an interesting way of being a little bit more eco-friendly. And what was fascinating to me was the culture. I love culture. I love company culture. I've written a lot about it. It was one of the most important things in my company. I believe that's what really is the fuel that creates a great company. And I found in Airbnb a place where people were quite passionate about the mission. And so I'm the old guy in the room who's helping to spread hospitality to 500,000 hosts around the world in almost 200 countries.
So how do you do that?
How do you do that? Yeah, that's a good question. That was part of again, curiosity.
Yeah.
The curiosity of how can we do that?
Right. I mean, it's not like you have, complete control.
They're not employees.
Over these individuals, right?
They're independent hosts. Many of them are micro entrepreneurs.
Right.
Some of them started just by doing one, and they may have 4 or 5 apartments or homes that they've gotten. And here in New York last night, I gave a class. I did a class on hospitality moments of truth to about 150 hosts. But that's not the way you scale it. You scale it online. And so we've created a bunch of tools that we'll be launching this November that will actually there'll be a lot of hoopla around it. Tools for hosts to actually do their work better. How do you understand how to create a personalized and customized guide to a guest to your listing?
Right.
What are the kinds of questions you should ask someone who's going to come visit you that would help you create a set of things for them to do that would be perfectly suited for them? How do you keep your listing clean? I mean, that's one of the basic things you need to do. And we created 9 standards that every listing in the world is going to have to live up to as well. Because that's one issue for Airbnb is as diverse as the collection of properties are, from places that are $2,000 a night to places that are $20 a night.
You need a baseline.
You need to have some brand promise that sort of brings it all together. And we're going to have a matching component, which allows people to find the listing that's perfect for them. If you're going to Paris and there's 27,000 listings, how do we understand you so well? Because you've stayed with us before. We know based upon reviews what you've loved, what you haven't loved. You've filled out a little profile. Now we can curate your life.
So it's kind of like their version of Amazon's
Amazon, Netflix. We're going to ultimately, my goal and part of my responsibility is to make us the best in the world at one-to-one customization of understanding who you are, and then not just offering the listing that's perfect for you, but curate a set of experiences for you on your home-to-home journey of things you can do along the way that are going to be perfectly suited for your personality and interests. So that's fascinating, and that's why I sort of came out of retirement, or I'm mixing that with being this festival guru at the same time, and it's it means I'm not sleeping enough. But I'm passionate about both. They both feel like callings. And when you have a calling, it's something that comes and it sort of all of a sudden gets embedded inside of you. And it's like, wow, you have a calling, you have to answer the phone. Someone's calling you. So I feel like I'm having twins. That's what festivals and Airbnb, I'm having twins.
Yeah, and they really play into each other in so many ways that you probably wouldn't suspect on the surface. But when you really go into the surface, you're like, oh yeah, there's a lot of common threads there. Yeah. Especially when you start to expand the Airbnb thing to, okay, baseline standards, but then also end-to-end experience.
That's right.
How do I create like a mini experience of collective effervescence for an individual, or a sense of belonging, or a sense of, okay, I'm not just staying in a home that's being in our service, but I'm having this experience of a sense of connection.
Wouldn't it be fascinating if you're driving from, let's say you live here in New York and you're driving to Boston, you've booked an Airbnb listing in Boston for 5 nights, and we know you're driving, and we know your interests and what sort of lights you up in life, and we wouldn't just say, here's the things to do in Boston. We actually know you're driving there. Here are 6 things to do on your drive from here to Boston that would totally light you up based upon who you are. Wouldn't that be fascinating? Hotel companies don't do that.
Right.
So our goal is ultimately to really be able to be a curator of life experiences. And so you can tell, I'm very fortunate. The other, beyond curiosity being linked to happiness, the other thing that's linked to happiness is gratitude. In fact, the fastest way to get happy in life, pretty much on any continent it's been proven, is to immediately go to gratitude. And so I just feel a lot of gratitude today. My life is a mess, and was really a mess 5 years ago when I had my flatline experience. And everything was a mess. I had no money, I was running out of money, I was talking to bankruptcy attorneys for both myself and my company. My son, I have a foster son who's his mid-30s. Back then he was at 28, he was going 29, he was going to San Quentin prison wrongfully, and he was in there for 8 months until a federal judge let him out and said he's innocent. Had a long-term relationship ending. I had
like the perfect storm.
Everything went wrong. Could go. It did, and I weathered it. And the truth about our emotions that I've learned is that our emotions are like the weather. And once you sort of realize that, you don't resist the weather. You just put on the right clothes to weather the weather. And the trauma you may go through, the anxiety you may go through, is something that can move through you. And if you are porous enough in terms of how you can see your life, and you don't get too attached to the negative emotions you have during the most raucous and difficult times, those emotional storms, you can allow it to just move through you, and on the other side of it is some sunlight, and that's what happened for me. I did get to the other side, got to some sunlight. I've had 3 great years lately, which has been wonderful. But there's going to be another storm passing through at some point, and so all I can do is take the wisdom and along the way have the gratitude around saying not only gratitude for the good times I'm having today, but the gratitude for what I've learned from those bad times. That is wisdom, and wisdom is just pattern recognition. Being able to see the patterns in advance today, so I'm almost like a weather forecaster, which is a way of seeing what's coming next, and be able to then prepare my emotions accordingly. So.
Yeah. I think it's so powerful to be able. Nobody wants to go through hard times, but when you go through them and with a similar lens, and saying, okay, look, question 1 for me is always, can I actually change a circumstance so it doesn't suck? Because if I can, I'm going to do it.
Sure.
Sometimes the answer is yes, but sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is you are in it, like you are deep in it, and part of what you need to do is just be in it.
Yeah.
And you know that there's going to be another side, or maybe you don't know that, but you know that you have to show up and do the work and do the best you can and find a way through. And you don't have control over the circumstance, but what you do have control over is the way that you experience it. And that was the whole, we're coming full circle to Viktor Frankl, right?
Viktor Frankl said 3 sentences that just changed my life. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is your power to choose your response. In your response lies your growth and your freedom. It's probably a good way to end. But it's true. You know, between what happens, the circumstances, and how you choose to react or respond, there is a space. Our brains have an amygdala, which is that caveman part of our brain, which helps us to make sure that if a saber-toothed tiger is about to jump on us, that we move, we bolt. And that fight or flight or freeze mindset we've taken into the modern world, and we frankly don't need to use it like we do.
Right.
And so figuring out how to create that space and to not react and to find some meaning in that space such that you have growth and freedom. To me, that's the ultimate, those enlightened beings on this planet who are able to go through good times and bad times with the same smile on their face, those are the ones who somehow have taken those 3 sentences of Viktor Frankl to heart.
Yeah, which actually really brings it completely full circle. So the last thing I like to ask everybody is, the name of this project is the Good Life Project. So if I offer that term to you, to live a good life.
I'll take it back to the start. To live a good life is to live a curious life. Is to appreciate that being curious means not worrying about the saber-toothed tiger. We're lucky. Back then, the caveman had a saber-toothed tiger who was about to jump on them. He didn't have a lot of time to be curious. Curiosity is it's a wonderful byproduct of the modern life, and one of the reasons why the time when most people are least happy in life, they have the bad life, not the good life, is between age 35 and 50, because it's the time when people are least curious in life. They don't have time to be curious. So I would sum up by just saying the good life is the spacious life where you allow enough space in your life to have curiosity.
Powerful. I like that. So awesome hanging out with you. We could jam for a long time after this, but I know you're in the tail end of like a 5-day stint here, so you're going to sleep early tonight.
I'm going to sleep to bed. I'm really excited about that. I'm going to create some space in my life tonight.
Great hanging out with you. So I'm Jonathan Fields. My guest today has been Chip Conley, signing off for Good Life Project.